Our first speaker for today, Dr. Iván C. Balán, who is going to be talking to us about his research on HIV self-testing in the context of intimate partner violence. So far this week, we've had the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Cheryl Johnson and Sister Love. We've also heard from Dr. Rob Stevenson and Kiaran from Project Moxie, who were talking about the importance of how we can notify our partners and being able to talk about our sexual health with our partners. And so Dr. Balán is going to be talking to us about some of that research. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and bring you up, Dr. Balán, so you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and share some slides. I believe you should be able to do so now.
Yep, let me bring those up. There we go. Everybody can see those at this point? Okay, sounds good. So first of all, I want to thank Jose and the Latino Commission on AIDS for inviting me to take part in this. I've watched been part of the last two presentations and have been incredibly impressed. It's a really wonderful series that they have pulled together. So before I start, also to my wonderful interpreters and to Jose, please, if I start speaking a little too quickly, feel free to let me know. I am Cuban and have grown up in New York, and neither of those things are helpful in terms of speaking slowly. But so I will try, but I have no problems with being reminded of that. So today I'm going to be speaking about aggression or violent incidents in the context of using HIV self-test to screen sexual partners among key populations. And before I get into the specifics of that, let me just give you an idea of what this line of research has been for us. And this has been going on for over 10 years. So we have done two studies that use the OraQuick HIV test. The first study that was from 2009 to 2012 really began to explore the possibility of partner testing using rapid tests. And this came on the heels of a study that we did among MSM who engaged in bareback sex, right? So individuals who decided that for one reason or another, they would rarely or never use condoms during anal intercourse. And of course, me being a psychologist, thought that was the craziest thing ever, right? Especially in the absence of the biomedical prevention approaches that we have today. But we did in-depth interviews with 120 participants in that study. What we really came to see is that what they were doing was placing a greater importance on the pleasure and the intimacy of condomless intercourse, but they were also taking precautions to reduce the risk of infection. And the primary one was having sex with people of their same HIV status, serosorting. But most of the serosorting was based on asking people what their HIV status was, or sometimes just deciding that somebody looked healthy, or among our HIV positive participants deciding that, you know, if you were barebacking, you were probably somebody who was positive. So our thinking right towards the end of that study, there was a small article in the New York Times about OraQuick's plans to take their test as a rapid HIV home test. And we thought that if we engage these high-risk individuals to use this test in the context of sexual encounters, it would allow them to serosort in a much more accurate manner. So that was our first study, thinking about this hypothetically, and then we gave it to 30 MSM to use with sexual partners. Based on the positive results of that, then we did a 5-year study that was a randomized study in which half the participants got test kits and half didn't, and we were looking at their sexual risk behavior. In this study, which we called ISOM, which stands for I'll Show You Mine, which was a little play on words, because what we learned in the first study that was oftentimes the way that our participants got their partners to test was by saying, well, I'll do it in front of you and I'll show you my results if you show me yours. So that study just completed, and it's from that study that I'll be presenting some findings today. And those two studies were led by Alex Carballo-Dieguez, who is now retired and enjoying, COVID in Rincon, Puerto Rico, by the beach. And I'm finishing up the last study, the SMART test study, in which I'm the principal investigator for. And that one, for that study, we're using the INSTI multiplex, which is not currently FDA approved, but we can use it for research. And we have developed a smartphone app to accompany its use and improve linkage to care. So as you can see, it's a long line of research. I will focus on the findings from ISOM, but I will also share with you, how they compare to the findings of some of our other studies. So it's important for you to understand what the context of our studies was. As I said, it was really to help people serosort more accurately with sexual partners so that they can make more informed decisions about the sexual behavior in which they want to engage. So we almost skipped the context of self-testing just for me. We very quickly came to see this as a way of testing partners. For that reason, we have always focused at people with people who are at very high risk of infection. So these are individuals who have multiple sex partners, tell us that they rarely or never use condoms for anal intercourse, which that's difficult to get people to say because there's a lot of stigma around that. But those are the people that we want. We focus on men who have sex with men. And in the ISOM study and in the SMART test study, we have also had a subsample of transgender women. ISOM took place in New York City and Puerto Rico. And SMART test is just in New York. And through our recruitment, we have been really effective at getting a very diverse sample of participants, the great proportion of which are African American and Latinx. And as I mentioned, a lot of our work focuses on reducing, not just being informed about one's HIV studies, but on reducing the risk of infection via testing sexual partners. So in ISOM, let me give you a little bit of an outline of what we did as the procedures. So participants came in once they were deemed to be to meet the inclusion criteria. They completed a baseline questionnaire. Then using the experiences and the stories told by the participants in our first study, we developed a 12 to 15 minute video that uses professional actors, but reciting the words of our participants and what we learned from them in terms of how they would raise the issue of testing with partners, what they would do in case they have been drinking or drugging, things to consider in case somebody tests positive. So we were very cognizant that we didn't have answers to tell people, do it this way. What became evident from our first study was that people really use their own personal skills in navigating difficult conversations. Some use their sense of humor. Others, approach them very differently. So what we wanted in the video was not to tell people what to do, but to give them an idea of things that they should consider, right, before they started using these test kits with partners. So everybody watched that video. It was in Spanish and in English. Then we gave the participants 10 kits to use over the next 3 months to test themselves and test their partners. After 3 months, they returned. They completed another questionnaire. And we did in-depth interviews with the transgender women who were taking part in the study, because we had not worked with them before in these kinds of studies. So we wanted to understand their experience. And we also did in-depth interviews with those partners, with those whose partners tested positive. This was a randomized study, as I mentioned. Some, half got the test kits, half did not. We compared their sexual behavior after 3 months. For those who received the test kits, after 3 months, they didn't have any more left. So then we asked them to come back another 3 months later to see how having test kits over 3 months affected the following 3 months when they didn't have test kits. So, of course, in a study like this, in which you're giving people test kits to use with partners, there's always going to be concerns about violence and how partners might react. Now, we're very careful in telling our participants, look, your safety is key here. Do not, if you feel that there's a partner that you should ask, don't ask them. Please use your judgment. And we also tell them, respect people's decisions to not be tested. People may not want to be tested in this context because they may not be ready for the news. They may prefer to do this with a professional. They may prefer to do it for different reasons in different contexts. And that's not, and that decision should be respected. So I'm going to focus this presentation on this aspect of aggression or violence in reaction to proposing or using the test. So I mentioned to you that we had a baseline questionnaire when people first came in, and they completed this on a computer. So it was self-administered. Close to 300 individuals completed this assessment. And we wanted to get an idea of how comfortable they felt with their abilities to deal with any violent situations. So we asked them these 3 questions. How hard or easy would it be for you to judge whether a sexual partner could become violent over taking a rapid HIV test? Avoid violent situations that might arise over taking a rapid home HIV test? Or if you were in a situation like that, handle the violent situation. So we see that large majorities felt that it would be relatively easy for them to achieve each of these, to overcome each of these situations, right? Smaller numbers felt that it would be hard or very hard. We were concerned about people who really didn't feel that they would be able to avoid the situations or handle the situations if they found themselves in this. So those people who responded very hard to either the second or the third question were excluded from the study for their own safety. So participants complete this assessment, they're giving the test kits. 3 months later, they come back. How did they use the test kits? And remember, now we're talking around approximately 130 individuals, which were half of the total sample of 260 or so, right? So 88% of our participants used the test kits with at least one potential partner. 19% also reported that they did not ask one partner among the many that they might have had for fear of a negative reaction. And that wasn't just about aggression or violence, but it could also be because, they didn't want to end that sexual encounter, and they thought the person might end it if they proposed the test. 55% of these participants proposed the test used by phone, text, or chat as they were discussing hooking up. 86 proposed the test used in person. 94% of participants had at least one partner take the test, and 34% of participants had at least one partner refuse to test. 14% of participants had at least one partner receive a positive result on the test. I won't get too much into that, given the topic of this presentation. That 14% included partners who were unaware of their infection, as well as partners who were aware of the infection, but that had not discussed that with the participant if they were ongoing partners, or in the context of a new sexual encounter, had not raised the issue. Now that I say that, keep in mind when our participants are testing partners, they're testing some partners who they have known for a long time and have been sexually engaged with for a long time. partners who they have known for a long time, but maybe this is a new sexual partner, but they're also engaging people that they have just met. So they might be, on Grindr and negotiating, hooking up, and in that context, they're raising the issue of testing once they are, they actually get together. So you see how much it was used. Now, on the follow-up, 3 months later, we asked people again, the same 3 questions, but now reporting on the last 3 months. How was it for you doing this? So that's why you see the numbers that are lower than in the other one, because it's only among the individuals who were in the intervention arm. You see that for many people, this didn't apply because they were never in a situation in which violence or aggression arose, so they didn't have to handle it. So we still have a majority of people who found it relatively easy to deal with these situations. What you see is that where it's more difficult to, what's a little bit more difficult is to know or to judge whether a sexual partner could become violent over this, especially in the context of somebody that you just met. Yet, if a partner reacted negatively, most participants were able and felt that they were able to handle these situations appropriately. So in terms specifically of aggressive or violent reactions from partners, right? So 45%, so among participants who proposed the test by chat or text, 45% reported that at least one partner got angry or upset. And that could be a range of, yeah, I'm not doing that, right? To much stronger anger. 34% of participants who proposed a test in person reported that at least one partner got angry or upset. 6% of participants reported that a partner became physically violent when asked to do an HIV test. There's 7 participants in total. 6 of these participants were in Puerto Rico and 1 was in New York. So in total, our participants tested 870 partners based on the responses to the questionnaire. And of those 870 partners, 13% were reported to have gotten angry or upset when asked to test. Something else to keep in mind is that because somebody got angry or upset when they were asked to test doesn't mean that the testing didn't happen. Oftentimes, the participant was able, if it was important enough to them, they were able to negotiate the situation and diffuse it. And oftentimes, the partner did wind up testing. And among the 870 partners that were tested, 2% reacted violently to being asked to do the HIV test. So what are some of the things that our participants reported? So here are 2 quotes from 2 participants that were transgender sex workers. I won't read them for you. You can kind of go ahead and read them for yourself. But this gives you an idea of the kind of situations that they would have encountered. Other participants who were not, transgender women who were sex workers experienced some of these reactions. Obviously, this is a population that's particularly, I think, vulnerable to having negative reactions from partners, given the context of the sexual encounter. The quote that you see, the second quote that you see, is from all of the experiences that I have been told from our participants, this is probably the most violent one that I have seen, right? To give you a range of what happens. So what do other participants say in this study? One is that they noticed that if drugs or alcohol are involved, then there's a greater likelihood that a partner might react negatively. They're a bit more disinhibited. The For others, they're just, it's interesting. Our participants ask partners if they want to test, and I think they don't really realize that when they say yes, the person's going to bring out a kit to test. And sometimes when that happens, really throws off the situation. I'll read a quote for you a little bit later on that really highlights this. Because you can imagine if you have a new partner and a sexual situation is beginning to build, where along that do you introduce this, right? And where the participant at the time that the participant wants to introduce it may not be the most receptive point for the partner. And lastly, some people, react aggressively or violently at the point that they get a positive test result. They were fine up to that point, but then there's a negative reaction, and we've seen that a few times. We don't have the other one here, but I remember one participant whose partners were transgender women reported that one of those partners got very angry and thought that he was and accused him of being involved with the city and trying to find her, and what was he doing. So we see that those situations that's how those situations tend to evolve. As I said, the great majority of our participants, when they come back to us and report on these situations, feel comfortable with the way they were able to handle the situation and remove themselves from any situation that was really escalating. So from ISOM, what we can see is that among mostly ethnic minority, MSM, and transgender women at high risk of infection, participants felt confident that they could avoid or handle potential violent situations. And during our study, our 3-month study, 88% of participants proposed a test to at least one partner, and most partners agreed to take the test. 1/3 of participants reported that a partner got upset or annoyed at being asked, and 2% became aggressive or violent. We have never had a serious injury to any of our participants in terms of proposing tests used to others. We have not reported this other bit of information either, but none of our participants have actually tested HIV positive during the study, and we've had no self-harm as a result of any of this home testing. So the findings that we have from ISOM are very similar to the findings from our other studies. So in the first study that I mentioned to you, our 30 participants tested 124 individuals. There were 7 occasions of verbal aggression and no physical violence reported by participants. And the SMART test study, our most recent study, out of 33 participants who proposed a test used to partners, 6 had at least one partner get angry or upset, but there were no occasions of physical violence. So I love this statement from one of our participants that really gets at this point of when you raise this. Now, obviously, aggressive or violent reactions are not only due to what a participant does, right? But this participant realized that there was almost like an art to when you bring it up, right? Participants would usually bring it up if they were going to engage in anal intercourse, right? For oral sex, it wasn't risky enough to go through a whole test thing, right? So there was a sense of like, well, I have to negotiate if that's what's going to happen. Then I have to negotiate when I'm going to kind of bring it up. You can't like build up the sexual excitement and suddenly say, hey, guess what? Now let's go test. That's one of the things that our participants often told us got partners really annoyed because that was unexpected at that point. So, so this participant really speaks to having to get a good idea of when this should be raised. So I did want to give you a little bit of a summary on other populations. There's a number of studies that have been done primarily with women and female sex workers in sub-Saharan Africa. who have been given test kits to use either with their study partners or with, in the case of the female sex workers, with clients. This is another quote that I love because it really speaks about people's abilities to negotiate this and use their inherent skills and skills they have learned to navigate any negative reactions. What I think is also really interesting and important to highlight is that in all of our studies, we've had our participants, and it's happened also in these studies, test people who are positive and didn't know. So if they would have been engaging with these partners, they would have been at very, very high risk of infection, especially because these are contexts in which condoms are not regularly used. So we see, I hate using the word few occasions of violence, just because any occasion of violence has to be paid attention. But quantitatively, we see few occasions of violence in these studies in different countries in sub-Saharan Africa. These are all published and available online if people want to look at them a little bit more and how they do it. So conclusions that we can take from this line of research: HIV self-tests are an important additional tool to curtail the spread of HIV, and their use with partners presents an opportunity to reach untested partners, discuss HIV, and negotiate sexual behavior. Proposing the use of these tests to prospective sexual partners has then appeared to result in many violent incidents that place people in danger. It's critical for us that are involved in research to monitor and capture these experiences to understand when they occur and how they can be mitigated. And that knowledge will be critical as hopefully these programs can be translated into community testing programs, right? So that we can share those experiences and knowledge gained to better prepare these programs to help their clients in the community. So of course, I'm presenting this presentation, but it comes from a large team of work. That's our team up on the top is our team in Puerto Rico, and that's the rest of us in New York. Here is, we've published a lot on these studies. We actually have more publications. If you want to take a picture of these, I have no problem sending this presentation out. But if you're interested in looking at other aspects of HIV self-testing, like what happens after HIV positive results or all sorts of things, there's a few papers here that focus on transgender women. And soon, because this is all federally funded research, soon they should be available free online as we're required. Last one here, just to let you know, is a paper that describes a smartphone app that we developed to facilitate self and partner testing using the INSTI. And hopefully we'll have the papers from that study out real soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Balán. That was very in-depth overview of that study that you were sharing with us. Before we bring up Florence and Mónica, just wanted to let you know that we have been getting lots of questions in the chat about the study.
Okay.
And so feel free to look those over while Mónica and Florence are talking to us about some of their work, and then we can have a group discussion before we close out. But I'm so excited to have Florence Simán and Mónica Drasal-Hinton with us today, who are representing El Pueblo, which is a CVO here, not too far from where I'm located in North Carolina. It's based in Raleigh, but has an impact that is felt across the state and the region for sure, and something that El Pueblo has been engaged in for the last several years is work around reproductive justice and sexual health, right? And so it was really important to me to bring Florence and Mónica to talk about some of their work on this topic and open it up in case they had some questions for you, Dr. Balán, as well. But Florence and Mónica, I want to go ahead and bring you both up so that you can tell us a little bit more about yourselves, and then we can have a good conversation.
Buenas tardes. Gracias, doctor Balán, por tan linda presentación. Gracias, José, por la invitación a ser parte de este día. Mi nombre es Mónica Drasal-Hinton. Trabajo en la organización El Pueblo, que está situada, como dijiste, en Raleigh, North Carolina, Carolina del Norte, y coordino un programa que se llama PARE. Les voy a hablar un poquito del Pueblo. El Pueblo es una organización sin fines de lucro que está basada, como dije, en Raleigh, especializada en el desarrollo de liderazgo para jóvenes y adultos. En cuanto a PARE, PARE es un programa que nació en el Pueblo y está diseñado para dar información a las sobrevivientes latinas de violencia doméstica y abuso sexual, en áreas que incluyen asistencia, recursos, educación, diríamos más bien empoderamiento, porque lo que hacemos es capacitarlas para que tomen acción para abogar por mejores políticas que promuevan sociedades libres de violencia. ¿Cómo hacemos PARE? PARE lo hacemos a través de grupos que le llamamos grupos de fortalecimiento. Las mujeres latinas, que son parte de nuestros grupos, son mujeres mayores de 18 años, y lo que hacemos es capacitarlas y entrenarlas a través de facilitadores que trabajan en el área de violencia doméstica y o abuso sexual. Estos grupos lo trabajan durante aproximadamente 14 sesiones, ese es el promedio, aunque pueden estar más tiempo. El propósito de los grupos es que las mujeres continúen su proceso de sanación, desarrollen autoestima, autosuficiencia y que promuevan afuera familias y comunidades libres de violencia. Ellas, a través de sus propias experiencias y a través de la capacitación que les es proveída en el pueblo, se encargan del movimiento para usar sus voces y experiencias y, en definitiva, para mejorar las condiciones y servicios para latinas sobrevivientes de abuso. Y ahora Florence les va a explicar un poco sobre el programa de justicia reproductiva que se combina con PARE.
Pues gracias, Moni. Como Moni dijo, mi nombre es Florence Simán y pues yo también trabajo en el pueblo. Llevo trabajando en el pueblo como 16 años y pues mil gracias, José, por invitarnos, por pensar en nosotros, por querer compartir como algo local que está pasando aquí en Carolina del Norte. Y doctor Balán, me pareció fascinante el estudio que usted compartió. Y estaremos, después de que hablemos un poquito del pueblo, hablaremos un poquito de preguntas y como reacciones. Las dos cosas que de repente se me vienen a la mente es como entender un poco más en la posibilidad de tener acceso a estos kits, el costo y esas cosas. Pero bueno, parte de mi trabajo en el pueblo, como dijo Mónica, es de liderar nuestro trabajo enfocado en lo que llamamos justicia reproductiva. Y lo que me parece increíble es que tengo el lujo en el pueblo de poder trabajar en la intersección de los derechos de la comunidad inmigrante, en este caso la comunidad inmigrante latina y la justicia reproductiva. No sé si todas las personas aquí están familiarizadas con el término justicia reproductiva, pero el término justicia reproductiva es básicamente un término que se empezó a usar cerca de 1994 y fue un término que un grupo de mujeres negras empezaron a darse cuenta antes de ir a una conferencia internacional en temas de población y desarrollo en Cairo. Empezaron como a analizar la realidad del movimiento que se enfocaba en las mujeres y se dieron cuenta, como que reflexionaron de que este movimiento básicamente era dirigido y representaba a mujeres, pero a mujeres blancas, y mujeres de clase media y mujeres adineradas. Y empezaron a sentir que el movimiento por los derechos de las mujeres no representaba ni podía defender las necesidades de las mujeres de color, ni de las mujeres marginadas, ni de mujeres trans. Entonces, este grupo empezó a pensar cómo crear un término que en serio se enfocara no solo en temas de aborto, porque muchas veces el movimiento de los derechos de las mujeres se enfoca en salud reproductiva, pero como el enfoque es el aborto, y no es que no sentimos que el aborto es súper importante y el acceso al aborto es súper importante, pero entender un poco que hay muchas cosas, muchos contextos que impactan si una mujer tiene derecho a ciertas cosas o no, ¿no? Entonces, uno de los grupos que admiro muchísimo es un grupo que está en Atlanta que se llama Sister Song y que está liderado por mujeres negras y mujeres de color, y me encanta la definición que tienen ellas sobre el término justicia reproductiva. Y la manera en que ellas lo definen es algo que para mí se siente muy central al trabajo que hacemos en el pueblo, y que es que la justicia reproductiva es el derecho humano a mantener la autonomía corporal personal, tener hijos, no tener hijos y ser madres o padres de estos hijos en comunidades seguras y sostenibles. Entonces, no es solo el derecho de si podemos o queremos tener hijos o no, pero incluye también la parte de mantener a nuestros hijos en comunidades seguras y sostenibles. Siento que la justicia reproductiva está muy conectada con nuestra lucha como inmigrantes latinos aquí en Carolina del Norte, porque incluye como dos de los marcos que para mí son muy importantes. Uno que tiene el enfoque en el acceso a los servicios de salud, que siento que es muy importante, pero también se enfoca en los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, y más allá de eso se enfoca en el contexto en el que vivimos. Es el término que se usa en salud pública como los determinantes sociales de la salud. Entonces, por ejemplo, si una familia está en este país sin un estatus legal, eso implica que lo más probable, por lo menos aquí en Carolina del Norte, esta familia o los adultos en esta familia no tienen una licencia para manejar, lo que también implica que probablemente tienen miedo de la policía o de ICE o de la migra cuando van a alguna clínica, cuando van a una escuela, cuando van a una fiesta, cuando van a comer a un restaurante, y que básicamente esto afecta sus decisiones día a día de lo que quieren hacer. Por ejemplo, muchas de las participantes en nuestros programas han hablado de cómo su situación en este país, legal o no legal, afecta sus decisiones de si quieren tener hijos o no, o cuántos quieren tener, muchas veces por el miedo, por tener dificultades consiguiendo trabajos sostenibles, donde los tratan con dignidad, ¿no? Entonces, en el pueblo teníamos, hasta hace como 2 años, teníamos el programa de Mónica, que es el de PARE, que se enfoca en violencia doméstica y asalto sexual, y el programa que lideraba yo, que es el de justicia reproductiva. Pero empezamos a pensar que la verdad no veíamos la lógica de tener estos dos programas como dos cosas aparte. Entonces empezamos a unir los programas y a facilitar estos talleres. Ahora estamos facilitándolos una vez a la semana, tristemente los estamos facilitando por Zoom, y nos enfocamos en muchos temas. Empezamos con temas básicos como qué es la violencia doméstica, entender un poco nuestra anatomía, porque siento que son temas que muchas de las personas que participan en los programas aprendieron de anatomía hace 20 años, pero es un poco para entender nuestros cuerpos, los anticonceptivos, los embarazos, infecciones de transmisión sexual, el aborto, pero también apoyamos a las participantes a tratar de desarrollar un lente más profundo sobre los derechos humanos y la justicia social. Entonces tratamos de repasar como actos históricos de opresión y de resistencia y cómo estos actos han impactado nuestras vidas en el pasado, pero cómo están impactando nuestras vidas ahora. Entonces, en relación a la presentación del doctor Balán, o sea, otra vez, agradezco muchísimo toda esa información y tengo esas preguntas sobre cómo y cuándo sería accesible este kit de autoprueba, cómo se conseguiría, cuál sería el costo, pero lo que se me viene a la mente es, por ejemplo, para mí en una relación, digamos, que alguna persona esté ya sea teniendo relación con más de una persona o que esté teniendo relación solo con una persona, pero no tenga 100% confianza que la persona con quien está teniendo relaciones no está teniendo relaciones con otras personas. Siento que este kit en parte sería ideal, especialmente, por ejemplo, si la persona vive en un pueblo pequeño y no se siente cómoda yendo a una clínica porque no quiere que la vean en la clínica, o si, por ejemplo, como mencioné, si es una persona indocumentada y no tiene transporte o tiene miedo de llegar a una clínica o no tiene una licencia, o es una persona joven que todavía no tiene acceso a transporte, a un carro. Siento que la prueba pues le facilitaría poder hacerse esto de una manera privada, ¿no? Siento que, por ejemplo, pudiera apoyar, como ya se ha mencionado, si es una pareja que tiene una, bueno, aunque no sean parejas, si son dos personas que están teniendo relaciones sexuales, quizás puede ayudar a promover una buena comunicación y quizás a promover la honestidad. Pero como hablábamos con Mónica, yo estoy compartiendo como los aspectos positivos y cómo lo vemos nosotros, y Mónica va a hablar un poquito sobre nuestras preocupaciones y lo que podemos ver que pudiera ser como situaciones de riesgo, como mencionó el doctor Balán.
Claro, sí, como mencionó Florence, sobre las ventajas del kit, creo que sí, que tendría muchísimas ventajas en relaciones saludables, ¿no es cierto? Porque estaría, digamos, al alcance de la mano, sería increíble, creo que es una buena promesa realmente. Con respecto a parejas que no gozan de una relación saludable, que pueden ser abusivas, incluso violentas, sería ideal también. El tema es que yo no creo que sea factible. Como se mencionó en la presentación, el uso irregular del condón es un factor de riesgo de VIH. En parejas con relaciones establecidas, que conviven y que no están en una relación saludable, donde los acuerdos no se respetan, no son casi inexistentes, a donde no hay posibilidad de diálogo, lo más probable es que no usen condón tampoco. Y que tampoco una de las partes esté dispuesta a hacerse el test. Creo que la sola mención de hacerlo, por parte en este caso yo estoy pensando en la víctima, que le puede pedir esto a su abusador, abusadora, podría desencadenar una situación de bastante riesgo para esa persona, ¿no? Yo recuerdo en nuestros grupos de personas que nos han comentado de que se lo han mencionado a sus parejas y eso desencadenó en terribles discusiones y agresiones. Ahora bien, a través del programa de justicia reproductiva que combinamos con PARE, como Florence mencionó, nosotros tuvimos la posibilidad y tenemos todavía, y esperemos que lo podamos hacer en el futuro, la posibilidad de ofrecer un espacio dentro de la organización para que las personas, las participantes, puedan hacerse la prueba. Lo hemos hecho, siempre ha resultado muy exitoso porque la mayoría ha participado. Lamentablemente, por razones de la pandemia, tuvimos que parar todo, porque bueno, ahora estamos haciendo todas las capacitaciones, no las hemos detenido, las capacitaciones se están haciendo en forma virtual a través de Zoom, pero repito, vamos a continuar haciéndolo como sea y vamos a promover el test casero, por supuesto. El que lo quiera y el que crea que es posible, porque no hay un 100% para todo, ¿no es cierto? Se lo vamos a promover, por supuesto. Y que ellas, a su vez, las personas que participan en nuestro programa, lo promuevan afuera, porque esa es nuestra razón de ser del programa, es que estas personas se conviertan en líderes comunitarias y con sus experiencias lo puedan promover afuera. Más personas lo sepan. Gracias otra vez, doctor Balán, por su excelente presentación.
Thank you. And Dr. Balán, before you respond to some of those great questions, I just wanted to give thanks again to Florence and Mónica. We have a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A. I don't think we're going to get to all of them for today for sure, but wanted to invite you all, Mónica, Florence, and Dr. Balán, to share your emails if you feel comfortable in the chat so that people can follow up with y'all and learn more about some of your work. And I just wanted to, before we get into some of the conversation, name that when we've been tracking some of the data around the transmission of HIV, diagnosis of HIV, that we see that in the context of women, a lot of times it happens that because they are in long-term relationships, they don't go and get tested as frequently, right? And so one of the barriers that we're facing, right, is that people don't want to go to a clinic, especially if it has the title infectious diseases in it, because they are worried that their partner is going to then assume certain things about their behavior, right? But we know that testing is something that it should be happening for everybody, regardless if you're in a long-term relationship or not. So that's just the context that we're working in. And so all of this work that Florence, Mónica, and Dr. Balán is doing is really trying to come up with some strategies, right, to figure out how we can best meet the needs of our community. And we know that one size isn't going to fit all. So I just wanted to put that out there, open up the floor, Dr. Balán, if you wanted to give some responses, and thank y'all.
Sure. And thank you, Florence and Mónica. I think your work brings, I mean, my goal as a researcher is for this to inform what happens in the community. And I think that what you presented really highlights that, right? So it doesn't work if it just stays in my office. So here's some easy things. Let's start with those. So for this study, for the ISOM study, we just used the OraQuick at-home test, which is available. It's FDA approved. You know, it's very expensive to buy at CVS, but there are probably some state programs that you might be able to get it from there. I am not, you know, I'm not very familiar with all of the programs that you offer, right? But one of the things, as you were speaking, one of the things that occurs to me is that there are people, you know, in this webinar who might have a lot of experience, you know, with the whole HIV self-testing or testing, you know, and how partners can negotiate. And there's a long history of partner testing and couples testing among MSM, and those issues sometimes come up because sometimes they're supposed to be monogamous relationships and they're not, right? So also partnering with some of those organizations might give you an idea of how they have navigated some of these simpler issues, right? The self-testing brings all of those benefits, that it's much more private, that it happens, you know, in one's home and all that. So that's recognized. I always believe in trusting people's knowledge about themselves and their life situation. So as you were speaking, my thought was, well, you know, I think as we learn more about these potential uses of self-tests, we can share them with people, you know, and say, which of this would work for you, right? So it may not work that you use it with a partner, right? How can this be used so that you test more regularly, right? Who knows? You might have some really nice successes in your organization with people testing partners who they didn't think was going to go well. Creating a space for those lessons to be shared and how these conversations may be had with some of those partners. I'm certainly not saying that that there isn't, especially, I mean, there are some partners that this should never be approached with, right? It's just too dangerous, and we should absolutely recognize that. But let's share new ideas with the clients that we see to see which might be useful to them, even if they have to reshape them a little bit. Okay. Let me just comment on a couple of things. So Cheryl, your question about long-term stuff, we don't have long-term stuff or long-term findings about negative reactions turning positive, because we oftentimes don't follow these individuals much longer than the 3 months. What we do have, however, there's been a number of situations in which a participant has asked the partner to test, the partner doesn't want to test, like storms out or gets angry, and this is the partner that's known to the person, right? And then they come back and say, all right, so what was it about those tests? You know, because there is something nice about people kind of wanting or people having condomless sex without worrying about HIV infection. And that's usually how this conversation goes, at least with our population that we've worked with, right? So if we do this, then we know we're not at risk, and boy, are we going to enjoy it, right? So we've seen those kinds of things turning around, but we haven't seen it on longer term. In terms of the question on discordant results, so everyone that's in our study is HIV negative. So if a partner tests positive, that's a discordant result. Obviously, our participants feel much more comfortable redoing the test because they know their tests from when they came to our site and their test result. So that's it's navigating the participants' reactions. Among participants who test, among partners who test positive, violent reactions are also very few across our studies. Our participants tend to be very supportive and very caretaking when a partner tests positive, encouraging them if they're not, you know, these were in New York City, gay men, many of them were very knowledgeable about places to follow up. So they would recommend places to participants. Some stayed in contact with the partners, even though they were new partners, and accompanied them to clinics. So just the positive result has only on very few occasions resulted in violence. When we look at the numbers, I think actually more of the aggressive reactions come as a proposal of the test. Once people are willing to test, then they've decided, you know, whatever comes, whatever the result is, I'm going to deal with it, right? Even if it sometimes gets a little away from them.